What's this?
I see you, Bruce, but how can I get in here?
I see you, Debbie. But all I see is part of your chin.
Debbie, you were muted. I had no.
Hi, Bruce.
Do you see me?
I do see you.
I don't see me. It's very weird.
Huh.
It means my camera is not on, but it says it's on.
I see you. You're there. And there's Debbie, and now she's moved over.
I don't know.
Debbie got herself muted.
It's very strange.
There's Deb Fitzell.
Whoops. How do you switch camera?
I don't know.
That didn't do
a lot
it.
of medication.
Wrong way. There you go. You just have to adjust your screen so that it gets your whole head, not just your chin.
Well, I don't even know where my
Are you using an iPad?
I'm on my iPad.
There you go.
Yeah, now we can see your head.
Yeah.
Oh, there I am. Hi, Deb.
Hello, welcome everybody.
Hello.
Oh,
Hey. So what we're going to do, I have 2:00. So we had about 20 people signed up for today. I know Michelle is with us already, which is great. What we're going to do, because we have some people who are docents and some people who are new to Homewood and may not know everybody. So what I thought we'd do this time is, it's okay, I'm going to keep everybody on mute for the program, and then when we get to the Q&A, we'll unmute your mics, and then we can chat and ask Michelle questions, or we also have a chat box. So if that's all right, I'm going to go ahead and mute you guys, and we'll get started.
okay.
Great. All right, I think we are ready. First of all, I want to welcome everyone to Homewood Museum's online lecture series. Today, we'll be talking about antique reproductions in our print collection at Homewood. This is the second of 3 talks. Last week, we talked about furniture. This week is prints, and next week, we'll be talking about ceramics. Right now, Homewood is closed to the public, like so many museums throughout the country. But we are going to continue to have programs through the summer, and we've already started scheduling for the fall. So we have, if we can't meet in person, we will continue to have programs. There'll be an online venue. So we'll keep ourselves on mute, and I want to let everyone know that we're going to be recording today's program. So I'm going to quick do that and set record. All right, great. And I'd like to let you know that you can use your cursor to toggle over the bottom of the screen if you have a PC. And then the chat box option will be one of the icons on the bottom. There should be, once you see your chat box, you click on that, and then you can enter your question or your comments. And we look forward to hearing and seeing your comments and questions. Okay. I'd like to begin by introducing Michelle Fitzgerald. Michelle is the assistant curator at Homewood Museum. She completed her master's in American Material Culture at Winterthur at the University of Delaware. She's been with us about a year and a half now, and is a wonderful asset and brings much expertise to the museum. And with that, I'd like to give the mic over to you, Michelle.
Hello. Would you like me to say anything else by way of introduction?
Should go away. Mm-hmm.
Hello, my name is Michelle Fitzgerald, and I'm the assistant curator at Johns Hopkins University's Homewood Museum. And today we're going to be going over the second in a series of curators care talks that were originally done in the summer of 2019 for our docents. And now we're bringing them to you to enjoy in the comfort of your own home. And our goal today in this talk is to get comfortable using the language and terminology to describe prints and the context in which they were produced in Baltimore, just as an introduction for you to learn a little bit more. Homewood has a great representative collection that you would see in a late 18th, early 19th century American home. It includes a variety of printing techniques and genres of subjects in our collection. And understanding these prints is a great window into how early Baltimoreans and Americans in general saw themselves through what they displayed. In the same way that we may choose our posters in college dorms or the paintings that we select in our homes today. Today, we're going to touch on the introductory level of antique prints, meaning we're mostly going to talk about the original runs of these prints, starting with the different genres of things you may see distributed on prints in the early 19th century, the period of Homewood's interpretation, and then moving on to understanding of different printing techniques and how these prints would be made. I would also like to conclude by introducing you to some Baltimore printers as well as the people that Charles and Harriet Carroll would have purchased their prints from in early America. Prints have been around for at least 11 centuries and were widely globally distributed throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. A print involves the partnership of an artist, a printer, and a publisher to produce a limited run of identical images on paper. Customers purchase these for display in their home with intentional significance or to show off their taste and understanding of popular and classical arts and culture. For historians, prints are very useful in providing visual evidence of what themes were circulating among the most people and gives us a view into how people saw themselves. Prints could be displayed in any part of the home, including the hall, particularly in the 18th century, and living spaces like dining rooms and studies. Sometimes displayed, much like paintings are, as you can see here on the left, with groupings together on the wall. These two houses, for record, were designed around the same time. We have Kenwood House in London on the left and Mount Vernon, of course, in Virginia on the right. Prints are not just limited to the United States, though. So all of these elite homes would have had a mixture of prints and paintings in their homes. Prints were also a means of making art accessible to both the elite and the middle classes, depending on the sort of run that you have. Print shops could produce a variety of things for many purposes. Some shops specialized in newspapers, but you also see them producing work used for advertisements, book frontispieces or book plates, promotion, and tourism, as well as the prints framed and displayed for pleasure that we'll be focusing on today. And here we have an example of a print shop in the 18th century. Many of these tools are earlier versions of what we still use, particularly in hand printing. So moving on through some different types of prints you may see from the early 19th century, many of the earliest views of Baltimore, as well as many other American cities, come from maps. Maps help to show off the growth of the city and in part act as an advertising campaign. They may also be displayed on walls and homes and public buildings to demonstrate nationalism. Also, according to Colonial Williamsburg's prints curator, Margaret Pritchard, up-to-date globes and maps in homes demonstrates that the male patriarch was a gentleman of the Enlightenment, interested in science and geography. Visitors familiar with Homewood and many other Maryland collections may recognize this early Baltimore map, which was first completed by Charles Vail in 1801. The map didn't sell so well, so Vail sold the plate to Warner and Hanna of Baltimore, who printed, published, and retailed it. For historians today, these maps are significant in marking a city's growth, as well as providing layouts, perspectives, and new context for some buildings and estates. For example, this detail from the Warner and Hanna map on the left includes the country estate Harlem, which is also represented in the painting on the right. Bird's eye map views were not the only way that printers could contribute to advertising for cities or consumers could display images of their hometown. Hence, the popularity of natural landscape images or views of public buildings or private estates in cities. Looking at this image for a moment, think about what sort of message it's trying to send about Baltimore. The view is idyllic, but more importantly, if we look towards the center of the painting in the background, we can see a busy harbor, lots of houses, people moving towards the city rather than away, suggesting that it's a good city to be visiting or moving to. Similar things are also happening in depictions of private estates, including this image here we have of Hampton, located in present-day Towson, Maryland. This image was completed by William Birch, the same artist who completes the views of Philadelphia in Homewood's reception hall. And many of these private or city views were compiled into print series that a customer could order colored or uncolored, bound or unbound. This is again what Charles Carroll of Homewood does when he's commissioning the views of Philadelphia, or purchasing them, I should say. Just like elite homes and views were commoditized and distributed, print consumers were also curious about elite society people. Similar to how we have tabloids to scan today, prominent men and women, particularly war heroes, nobles, and elite quote-unquote beauties, had their portraits printed and distributed beginning as early as the 17th century. As the daughter of Benjamin Chew and a member of elite Philadelphia society, This included Harriet Chew Carroll, who was painted here on the bottom right of the left-hand painting by John Trumbull in 1793. This portrait was then reproduced just over 50 years later in a publication called The Republican Court, which included portraits of American early 19th century elite society women. And in this image of that said print on the right, note the difference between the original painting and the later print of Harriet. This is a more dramatic example of how printers would sometimes make alterations from original copies because of either corrections that they want to make, individual artistic choices between the painter and printer, as well as modifications at the direction of the buyer, or what the printer thinks consumers might be more inclined to buy. Another popular distribution is classical or current popular paintings. Many reference popular moments or scenes that reflect that the owner is part of a club of taste or a national identity. Here we have an example of a very popular print, which is based on the death of General Montgomery by American artist John Trumbull, depicting the death of Patriot General Richard Montgomery, who died in a failed attempt at Canadian invasion in the early stages of the American Revolutionary War. This image would be found in American homes as a sort of foundational origin story in American nationalism, a craze that is particularly prominent in the early Republic period, which is Homewood's period of interpretation. The painting also helps demonstrate awareness of popular artists and tastes in the period. And this painting in particular is a great example of how more than one printer might create runs of the same work of art with slight artistic differences between the two. Take a moment here to examine the differences between these two prints. You may notice that Clemens on the left captures the softer line of quality of Trumbull's work better compared to Carolinus's more detailed lines. Carolinus may have more accurately captured the expression on the subject's face, however, compared to Clemens. This sort of individualism and artistic ability and choices make the printer a contributing artist to these art prints, as well as the original painter. The Clemens print is the one in the Homewood collection that you can see when you visit, and it hangs above the mantel in the guest chamber. Johann Friedrich Clemens was a Pomeranian-Danish printmaker who worked in the late 18th, early 19th century, and in 1792 received royal permission from London to create this print, which later earned him commissions to complete other Benjamin West and Trumbull works. So if you're interested in seeing this print in person, please come visit us when we reopen. Moving on to printing techniques, or how these images were made, printing is literally the transferring of ink from a prepared printing surface, called a block, plate, or stone, to a piece of paper. There are three main types of printing that we're going to go over today, and those are relief, in which ink is carried on the raised parts of the printing surface, intaglio, where ink is carried on the lower grooves of the printing surface, planographic, where ink is carried on the flat printing surface, and we will talk a little bit about each of these and the types you will see. Beginning with relief, it is the oldest of the three methods. You can think of a stamp for this one. The relief block will have all the non-printing areas cut away from it, and a roller with the ink is applied to the block. Multiple colors for an image require multiple blocks. So when looking for relief printing, look for the pressure of the block, meaning that the places where the ink was pressed down should be raised on the reverse side of the paper. You can also look for thick lines for the borders of the images. You may also, in the case of multicolored images, see some bleeding over lines or repeated patterns in the case of wallpaper. Next up, we have intaglio, in which the ink is carried into the lower grooves carved into the plate. Intaglio, to give you an idea, is Italian for incising or engraving an image. The grooves can be of different depths and therefore carry different amounts of ink, giving the ability that lines can be darker or lighter and thicker or thinner. It can be hand cut with an engraving tool or later chemically etched away with acid. Paper and plate have to be pushed together with greater pressure than relief printing, and paper must be pliable enough to fit into the grooves, so the paper does have to be damp for the printing process. For intaglio prints, look under a magnifying glass. The lines may look a little raised when doing so. You may also look for a plate mark, as in the images should fit within a depressed rectangle on the paper where the plate had been. Two common sub-areas of intaglio that you might see during Homewood's area include engraving on the right here, in which the printer takes an engraving tool called a burin and carves often parallel lines and cross-hatching to produce shading and shapes. In this case, look for lines that taper. They start lighter and get thicker. And this example has both stipple engraving and etching, or shades produced with little dots in it, thus demonstrating that multiple techniques can be used in one print. Etching is, as a note, the same thing as engraving, except instead of using a burin, they're using acid to remove the lines they want to use. Another version of intaglio is an aqua tint, here on the left. This utilizes another form of intaglio called a mezzotint. A steel plate is used and a rocker is applied to the whole surface, so if inked like that, the whole surface should take on a dark ink. Then the printer burnishes the metal where he would like lines to be lighter or take on no ink. For an aqua tint, look for tweed or a cross-hatching sort of look under a magnifying glass. 18th and 19th century printers realized this printing effect lent itself well to capturing a sort of watercolor look. And aqua tint's heyday was between 1770 and 1830, making use of the mezzotint technique I mentioned earlier. Instead of a rocker, they release dust and a chemical compound onto the surface that bites away at the metal and is then burnished away to give different shading. Here you're going to look for tiny randomized dots under a microscope. And to achieve color, different parts of the plate can be inked with different colors, or less commonly with intaglio, multiple plates are used with only one color each. Finally, there's planographic prints, in which ink is carried on the flat printing surface. Specifically today, we're talking about lithography, which was the original form of the planographic. Discovered in Germany in 1798, with a big surge in the United States beginning around 1820. In most cases for lithography, stone, a roughened zinc or aluminum, has an image created on it through greasy marks that are a chemical process and makes the marks fully receptive to grease and resistant to water, while at the same time making unmarked areas receptive to water and resistant to grease. The stone is dampened with water, and then a roller with ink is applied, and the ink only sticks to the greasy parts of the stone. The paper is pressed and rolled onto the plate to make a run. This is an extremely versatile medium. A good lithographer can achieve nearly any printing effect through this technique. For planographic prints, and specifically lithography, look for an evenness of tone between all inked areas because the ink is either adhering to the stone or not. Shading happens by the amount of paper covered in ink rather than the depth of the ink that you get in intaglio. Of all of these techniques, many of the prints that were circulated in the early 19th century American market were in the intaglio method, moving towards lithography by the end of the Carroll's time at Homewood. While Baltimore did have 8 printing and newspaper offices in 1802, most artistic printers appear to have still been residing in larger cities like Philadelphia, which is where many of the prints in the Homewood collection were produced. Several Philadelphia engravers in this period were producing prints as a way to supplement their income from primary careers as artists or architects. We have two cases in point here on this PowerPoint slide. The first being William Russell Birch, who produced the Philadelphia print series in the reception hall and was an English-born portrait painter, pictured here on the left. And the second being William Strickland, who produced Our View of Baltimore in 1752, that is featured in Homewood Study, who was an architect and civil engineer who began his career as an engraver, pictured here on the right. He would later go on to design the Tennessee State Capitol and the Second Bank of the United States in Philadelphia, which is in the background of his portrait. And he is also credited with bringing the Gothic Revival style to the United States, just to give you an idea of the variety of experiences and careers these printers would have had. In Baltimore, printers and publishers are just getting their start around the time that Harriet Carroll left Homewood for good in 1816. We will not see a lot of early Baltimore-produced prints in the Homewood collection, so I'm going to give you a very, very brief recap of some of the significant companies and names you may want to have in your back pocket when thinking about Baltimore printing. The first of which is Joseph Cohn, who completed one of the most significant prints produced in early Baltimore, known as the Poppleton Map. Cohn was born in Princeton, New Jersey in 1792 and spent most of his early life in Philadelphia, which is probably where he learned the printing trade. He settled in Baltimore by 1817 and did both engraving, line, and stipple, as well as some publishing. The Poppleton Map was commissioned by the city of Baltimore and is seen in part on the left side of this map of Maryland just before the War of 1812. Thomas Poppleton was not from Baltimore and little is known about him. He completed the city plan, including some roads that had yet to be created, between 1816 and 1822, and he also completed a plan for New York City. C.P. Harrison was the publisher who was responsible for the actual fabrication of the map and also lived in New York City. Joseph Cohn was the engraver and was the only member of the production team who lived in Baltimore at the time of the map's publishing. It was Cohn, not Poppleton, who completed all the designs and engravings of the Poppleton Map. You can see his rendering of the Peel Museum on the right. Also worth touching on, one of the other major lithographic firms in the city, like Cohn, also founded by a German immigrant who began his career in Baltimore at E. Weber and Company, and that is E. Saxey and Company, which was established around 1850. For Saxey and Company, it appears that its founder, Edward Saxey, both drew and printed many of the prints the firm published. Firms put all of these teams of artists, printers, publishers we've been talking about under one company. Also, like Cohn, it was a multi-generational family firm that famously produced the Saxey Map of Baltimore, seen here, which, along with the Poppleton Map and the Warner and Hanna Map, remains among some of the most significant historic depictions of the city. A final note to touch on something you may frequently see in antique shops are reproduction prints. While reproduction antiques and other mediums, we tend to think of that as anything produced outside the time period that looks like it should be a part of, such as colonial revival 1920s furniture being a reproduction of 18th century American furniture, prints are a little different. Plates used to produce prints only have a certain number of prints they can produce before the plate fails and can no longer copy the image. This concludes the original print run. In order to produce more prints, the printer will have to recreate a plate, thus meaning the print will be produced in a new run from a new plate. Or later on, images can be reproduced digitally through digital or Gicley prints, using basically a copier and a printer. Here we have two detailed examples of an 1880 view of Baltimore. The one on the left is the original run by Currier and Ives lithograph in 1880. The one on the right I found on Etsy and is a Gicley print on map paper of the lithograph produced in 2019. If you happen to be looking between two prints, look carefully and see if there are small differences in the execution. Look at the paper itself and hold it up to the light. Does the paper look woven or even have a watermark indicating when and where it was made? Is there potentially foxing on the paper, suggesting its age? Pay attention to the quality of lines. Reproductions, particularly digital ones, may have a blurrier quality to the lines, though this is getting better, as you might notice in the Gickley print on the right. Also, if the original is an intaglio print, you may also want to look for a print mark, or the image appearing within a rectangular depression in the paper on the possible reproduction. If you want to learn more, here are some books on prints that I recommend to be the most useful when it comes to understanding printing techniques, and especially the types of prints produced in or about Maryland. And finally, I want to conclude by thanking you all for attending this lecture today, and we look forward to seeing you at Homewood to come experience our print collection soon. Hi, everybody. If you have any questions, I think, Julie, we're typing them in the chat, right?
Yes, we are. Thank you, Michelle, so much. That was a wonderful presentation. We really enjoyed learning about prints. If you take your cursor and toggle along the bottom, you'll see a toolbar, and one of the icons is chat. And that's where you can type in questions for Michelle. If you would like to, everyone is unmuted for the moment. We're taking that off. And so if you do have a question, if you would just get my attention, I would be happy to get you chatting directly with Michelle. So we'll watch for some questions in the chat box. There we go. Thank you, Caroline Griffin writes, terrific presentation. Michelle, thank you so much. I have a question myself. First of all, it's really kind of amazing to know how early on in Baltimore there were so many prints shops. You said there were 8, I think, going on at the same time. Were there others, like some cities were known for furniture making, others were known perhaps for glass, for glass, what city in early Republic was known for print making? Was one city more?
Philadelphia, you got bids.
So that's a good question, Julie. That's a great question, Julie. So basically, any city that is producing a newspaper has a printer of some kind, because we talked about how they do a bunch of different ones. But since we're focusing more on those prints that were reproduced for pleasure viewing in some way or circulated for that mostly, Philadelphia and New York later on especially are really big centers for printing. Boston's another one. There's a really, so Rembrandt Peale is a good case. He's, in Baltimore. He founds a museum here. But prior to that, he also was interested in printing and does travel up by way of New York to Boston with lithography.
I might go ahead and mute everyone. And then, Michelle, if you unmute yourself, then we'll continue with the questions. Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you. So let's see what else is in the chat. Thank you for that. That's really kind of amazing to think about. I think of Benjamin Franklin being in Philadelphia, and then the newspaper printing is a whole nother kind of printing industry. Absolutely. Yeah. And, if you're looking for kind of representations of that, because I think printing's one of those things where it's very difficult for me to understand. It's difficult to explain the process verbally. So if anyone was a little confused by some of the processes, go on YouTube and search them. And there's tons of wonderful production videos of how lithography happens versus engraving versus woodcuts. If you don't want to watch YouTube, there's tons of
printing examples that pop up in popular culture too. I think the latest Little Women movie has a great example of a book being printed and produced. Outlander has a great printing press in it too. So you'll start catching really nice examples and learning from them too in that.
In the chat box, Michelle, you've gotten a lot of kudos. Carroll Dalquist wrote, so interesting. My grandmother Ruby, Louisa Josephine Cavendish Taylor is a descendant of Charles Carroll. Love to visit the museum sometime. Thank you. Deb Paluzny has a question regarding the print of Harriet. Deb, you go ahead and unmute yourself, and please feel free to ask your question.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
My question is regarding, in reference to the print of Harriet. So what you actually said was the portraits around Martha Washington. The one of Harriet down at the bottom is taken from the one of Harriet alone, and the printer just changed things about the way she looked. And also, by observing the one of her by herself, to me, she looks like she might be having a baby. The way she's holding her hands and the way her body looks. She looks, and I never even looked at that before. So that's my question.
That's a really good observation. What you're picking up on there, very, very observantly, very astutely, is a specific type of fashion that's being translated to the print too. And in terms of how you're positioned in those portraits, that's something that's been studied, especially in a lot of 18th century, early American portraiture by art historians, because in the same way that when we're photographed, there's certain ways we hold ourselves in photographs that actually shift with the times a little bit. And you do see certain ways that you're held in portraiture as well, shifting over time. So you have that, and then the combination of the fashion that she's wearing that is then reinterpreted about 50 years later. So, as we saw in that, the painting didn't look completely like the print, but according to the print. So again, this is coming from the printer's idea. We don't necessarily know what other influences are on that print specifically, but the printer is saying he got it from that Trumbull painting.
Thank you. Another point I do want to raise, Julia wrote that some folks had trouble logging on today. It was difficult to get into the talk. So yes, I appreciate your suggestion, Julia. We can re-air this talk. Michelle was so gracious to record this, so we will be able to put it up again this summer. Watch our Facebook page for the date for when we can replay this program. Excellent suggestion. We appreciate that. Does anyone have more questions for me?
I do. This is Margaret. Mm-hmm. I do. Let's see. Yeah. I have a question. Am I on here?
Yeah, we can hear you, Margaret.
Oh, okay. I didn't understand exactly. I've been thinking that those Philadelphia prints that are in the reception hall were actually ordered, and you said that Charles Carroll. I didn't know. I assumed it was Charles Carroll Jr. Had ordered those prints from Phil, and I had read something about Audubon prints originally that. They wouldn't even start printing until they had enough orders to print a particular thing. Is that the way the process worked? I couldn't understand exactly how they would advertise it. It would be a print that was already printed that they would somehow advertise, and then people would order it, or how did they do it exactly? Do you know?
Mm-hmm. So I think you might be talking a little bit about subscribers. As well. And so these are...
And that's a different thing, subscribing? I mean...
So the process for certain publications, so Audubon is a really good example, and the Philadelphia prints, which come out of a print series. So it's not one print.
Right.
That's going to be more expensive to produce. So what you might want is a little bit of fundraising for that from your friends who could then put money into it. And in return, they get copies of it. Hands down, the best example of subscriptions, because this is also the case with books too, large pattern books, is Chippendale's directory. So if you pull up Chippendale's directory online, it's free and available. The very first page has a list of subscribers, which is what the method Chippendale used to print the book. So Audubon is his book was extremely expensive to produce.
Yeah.
You've seen them at Evergreen. They're big, they're colorful.
Right.
That's expensive. So what that is getting the money to produce those very expensive prints.
Right. So it didn't depend on how many people were going to buy it eventually. It was money up front that they could acquire.
That's part of it. They were very conscious of how much money they would get from it, though. We are talking about people who are tradespeople and are doing this for a living. So like William Strickland and Birch and Robert Field, if you've seen our miniatures of Harriet and Charles, our miniatures.
Yeah.
Those are all men who were artisans who worked in a different field, but they would use printing to make an income as well. Right. So that's why they really are competing for those popular paintings like The Death of Montgomery and things, because they know they can get sales from it too.
Right. So they would advertise too then for the print itself. They would advertise somehow about the availability of the print itself too. Wouldn't they be doing that also? Advertising, or how would they know that it existed, people? How in Baltimore would they know that they were producing something like this in Philadelphia? It must have been advertised somehow.
It could be advertised. The print shop itself could also be advertised. The book could be advertised. The series, it can spread through word of mouth, newspaper printings. There's a lot of different cases.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to get, because I was slightly confused about that.
Bruce has a question. Bruce, did you want to ask Michelle?
I think actually we have a question right above Bruce's too.
Sure.
From Marcia Miller.
Yeah.
On the 3 book recommendations, if you don't mind me just jumping on that one too. So the 3 book recommendations that I'd recommend are, there's the Maryland History and Prints, which is by, I think, Laura Rice, and that's easily available. And that covers the history of Maryland, but in the text, but also includes some of the best print examples of Maryland imagery or printers from Maryland. So if you're looking for historic Maryland imagery, that's your best bet. Maryland History and Prints is that one. The other one that's really easily accessible that I have right here that I recommend is How to Identify Prints. Like, this book is the one you really, really want to get if you're interested in learning more about prints. It's going to take you through everything. It walks you through the type of print that you're looking at, the procedure. It's just absolutely the best book for identifying that. Okay.
So when looking at the print of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, then it just has occurred to me while you were talking that this was really just an artist's representation of what he thought it looked like. Because, well, for one thing, Charles didn't sign it till sometime in August. And also, Charles Carroll looks somewhat different than he does in any of the portraits we have of him. So I guess that was sort of like caricature making. I mean, it was just some observations I was making while you were talking and thinking about that.
So, and I'm going to actually expand that in general to a lot of those American Revolution big history paintings, since I know we have a couple people who may not have had a chance to visit Homewood yet. But we do have a print of the Declaration of Independence. Of course, our house is built by, or not built, but purchased by the son of a Declaration of Independence signer. And you're completely right. That's a great observation that these are, prints that are frequently based on paintings that are based on the event. So a great example, thinking of Charles Carroll, of that is any prints of George Washington's resignation. There's one by Trumbull in the Capitol Rotunda where Carroll and the Keaton girls, his granddaughters, are on the floor of the Senate chamber. The Caton girls were not there. They were also not born at the time of this event. So, or they were not that age at the time of the event. So that is Trumbull depicting the event. And then any prints off of that are further one more step removed of the printer interpreting Trumbull interpreting the event. So that's a really good example of sort of how these popular images of American history were actually distributed.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Deb Paluzzi, you had something, you were talking about a list that you have of the subscribers. Did you want to talk to that?
I just was letting you know, I have a pamphlet that I got from Homewood that I think was supposed to go in the trash, but I took it, which I do a lot. And it lists everyone who subscribed to the Philadelphia Prince. So Charles the signer and Charles Jr. both subscribed. Mm-hmm. But it's a really cool list of names that you know that ordered.
Cool.
Oh, boy.
That's neat. Thanks for sharing that. If we don't have any more questions, I do want to remind everybody of next week on Wednesday at 2:00, Michelle has prepared a lecture about ceramics in the Homewood collection. And again, we will make a point in the reminder that you have the correct link for the Zoom invitation. So I appreciate everyone's patience on that. And we really thank you so much for participating in today's program.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Caroline Jelovich shared this with me. And just to let you know that these kinds of programs are available in person and also online and offer special benefits for our members. We'd like to especially thank our members for supporting the JHU museums. You provide crucial support to help fund the programs such as this one, and supporting the care of the museum's collections, our research, our upcoming exhibits, and also research opportunities for students and professionals. If you're not a member yet, we hope you'll consider joining Homewood Museum and the Evergreen Museum and Library. Membership levels begin at $70 for individuals, $125 for families, and include benefits such as free admission to both of the museums, a 10% discount in the gift shops, and discounted tickets to all of our programs. And there are many other benefits as well as being on the mailing list and getting early notification of registering for different events, which do sometimes sell out. So it's really helpful getting the heads up early. And if you'd like to learn more about our membership levels and the benefits, please visit the website at museums.jhu.edu and click on support and then membership. Thank you all so much. Michelle, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.